TE Talks with Guides is a weekly podcast for lovers of history, travel, and all things Italian. Welcome back, everybody, to TE Talks, sponsored by Through Eternity Tours. I'm your host, Rob Allen, and on TE Talks, we get to talk with some of the most fascinating people who make a living out of being wonderful storytellers. We get to delve into what drives their passion. What is it about them that they want to share their experiences and what they've learned and do it as a living and brighten people's days when they take tours with them and do other things as well. Welcome back, Gracelyn.
Well, thank you for having me back, Robert Allen. It is great to be with you as always.
Thank you for joining us. So we did have a wonderful podcast with you. It was officially the very first one, talking to you about the Roman Forum and Julius Caesar. And today is a special day because we have actually received notification that we have received over 1,000 podcast downloads so far. This is great because
fantastic.
A special dream of mine to get this done for years. I'm so happy that we've had the opportunity to do that. Now, today we are going to talk about Ostia Antica because on our YouTube channel, we are having a video of TE destinations talking about Ostia, showing us Ostia Antica. So you also have a virtual tour about Ostia Antica. So tell us a little bit about why you wanted to do that virtual tour.
Ostia Antica. I was thrilled to do the virtual tour on Ostia Antica because it's a place that I love to take people to. It's a place that I love to share with people. And unfortunately, it just is a place not enough people, A, know about it, or B, understand its significance so they don't put it on their list. So it's something that I enjoy when I'm with clients and they're like, we have another day in Rome. We've done this, and they go through the museums and the sites there. And they're like, what can we do if we don't have time to go to a Pompeii? And I know that they're interested, especially in things like, the ancient story, archaeology, all that good stuff. I'm like, guys, have you heard of Ostia Antica? So it's been a lot of fun doing. I'm thrilled that I got to do it. And every time I give that presentation, I have people that just tell me, I had no idea. Why doesn't anyone tell you about this place?
Yeah.
What can I say? That's why we're here.
Exactly. It's so true. There are so many things that people need to see in Rome, or when they're traveling, they're doing a whirlwind trip and they're seeing the fountains and piazzas, the Roman Forum and Colosseum, or the Vatican museums, that they don't often have time to do this. And it's true, sometimes it's like, well, if we don't have time to go do a day trip to Pompeii, let's go to Ostia instead. But, it should stand alone for itself. Just
absolutely.
As a sidebar, I do make references about you and me and that we studied to become guides together in that very, very impossibly difficult exam to take and very nerve-wracking. So the final day that I had to do my oral presentation, I realized I had studied for months and I was like, I haven't studied Ostia enough. Oh my God. Okay. And so I was opening up my book because, they could have just said Ostia Antica. And I was just terrified. So I was reviewing Ostia Antica right before we got there. But the great thing is now I can.
Mine was the villas outside of Rome.
Yes, you had the villas outside of Rome.
Night before. And oh my goodness, I need to look up every single villa outside the Appian Way. So yes, I remember that feeling.
Oh my God, you're talking about the ancient villas like Villa Quintilli or Villa? Oh God.
The weekend before was just I think the day or 2 days before. I just was like, I have to get out there. I was out in the Caffarella, and thank goodness I was, because it ended up being one of my questions.
No, there we go. Serendipity. Yeah. Sometimes these things happen for a reason. Now, I have to say that with your virtual tour, which I have, of course, followed, it is wonderful. And that's what's wonderful about Ostia Antica anyway, is that you have the opportunity to delve into the daily lives of the ancient Romans. And the visuals are so wonderful. And I think it's a perfect thing to accompany if you were to go with someone to Ostia Antica, So why don't you tell us about that, and then we'll go into going into this place, going into this ancient city, and what is it exactly? Tell people, what is the Ostia Antica?
What is it? Okay. You know what? You can put it in a couple of different ways. One, it's an archaeological site, but let's make it as sexy as it should be. Because here's one of our problems. If you have a short time period, like we said, coming to Italy,
Mhm.
it's you can never come for long enough, which is why the majority of our clients have come over and over and over and over. But if you're coming in the beginning, yes, Rome, the city of Rome, the whole city is an archaeological site. But you have
Mhm.
to remember that Rome, we always joke, is the eternal lasagna, or layer cake, or
Yeah.
onion, because we're peeling back the skins. Because Rome, being the eternal city, which people don't always fully understand the meaning of the eternal city, this city is eternal because it hasn't stopped. It's gone through from that history of over 2,000 years ago to today.
Mhm.
It's a living, breathing entity. It is, ruins stuck to the Middle Ages with something from the Renaissance, with, government buildings. We are the
Yeah.
capital of a country. So Rome is basically on Rome and recycled into Rome.
Mhm.
Then people do know about Pompeii and Pompeii or Colonium, which are such spectacular sites
Mm.
because they're frozen in time, and they're frozen in time because of something extraordinary that happened, which is this boom explosion of a volcano. And the thing about Ostia, I think it gets lost because it's, not one or the other. People don't fully understand what it is.
Mhm.
Ostia is this fantastic Roman city, which is probably, they call it their first colony. It is only about 30 kilometers from the city of Rome going out to the sea, and it's strategic. It makes sense. It had to be where it was. But what happens to this is that it's kind of slowly abandoned and slowly covered all at the same time. So it's got some of the stratospheres, but not really. As we get to the point that it's uncovered, you have the joy of seeing what day to day Roman life is, because they've uncovered it to a level, the majority, second century, they've uncovered it to this one level. So you can, like you said, on my virtual tour, I try to say, hey, what do we do every day? Hey, let's go out to eat. Hey, I got to go work. I got to do this. You can do that, which you can't do in Rome. You
Mhm.
can do that really easily. Walk the streets, see where the shops were, see where people lived, look at the apartment complexes. Something else, which is kind of fun, there's still some of the second stories, and go into a building, go up the original staircase. So it's an interesting site because it's unique that it's been brought back. I mean, it's larger than people expect. It's about 90 acres
Mm.
excavated right now, approximately. But you see where they ate, you see where they bathed, you see where the theater was. So
Mm.
it's fascinating to walk through.
Mm.
It's a mini Rome. It's day in the life.
It's true, it's true, and just to give people a clear idea, to put things into a context for this. So,
Mhm.
Ostia really means mouth in Latin. So it's supposed
Yes.
to be the mouth of the Tiber.
Hmm.
And why was it so important? It was important because, as Rome, even in the time of Julius Caesar, which always bears repeating, was a city of over 1 million people in ancient times, and that they did not have the technology that we do today. Even here today, a city of 1 million people is not easy to deal with. And they had food imported from all over the empire or the republic. It was imported into Rome, and it had to go through this port, the first port of Rome. So it was the most important place, right? That's why it was huge. It was a city unto itself. It was a large city,
Right.
and it controlled because everything went up the Tiber from Ostia, and bringing the goods to the city of Rome itself.
Absolutely. And also the security of it, because, they tell us the tradition, oh, it goes all the way back to Ancus Marcius, one of the
Mm.
kings of Rome. It goes back to 620, the founding story. And, what we have is the oldest part of the city of Ostia is really fourth century, that bit of
Mm.
the walls of the castrum. But they have found and discovered pottery shards, things that
Mhm.
are in fact older. Most people don't date or don't doubt, I should say, the date of the founding or the age of the founding, because, before that influx of goods is coming into the city, which you mentioned, which made it such an important city that grows up to about 50,000 people.
Mm.
What made it so important is, if you think in antiquity, those people who controlled the river, you do two things. It's protection. Who's coming in from the Tyrrhenian Sea? So at this point, Rome is growing up. It was founded middle 8th century BC. Now we've gotten through about 130 years. They want to know who's coming in, who's passing through. And the other real reason the mouth was so important is that the largest salt flats of the Tyrrhenian Sea were out there. Salt was currency, salt was everything, salt was survival.
Conservatives, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right, because also that was another reason why Rome formed, because the cattle would go down the Via Salaria and then get up to the point by the Palatine Hill and walk all the way down to get to the salt marshes.
Exactly. The Etruscans are on one side, the Sabines are passing through. I mean, it was just strategic militarily, who's coming in and out, we want to know. And the other, it was strategic for the salt. And then later, as Rome grows, and we know the old expression, bread and circuses, right? Rome is growing at leaps and bounds. And, we don't have a whole lot of work for all the people those people living in that city in the time of Julius Caesar. But they knew, keep people entertained and their bellies full, and we don't have to worry about the lower classes rising up against us. And that's why Ostia was so important for the city of Rome.
And we have to imagine, when people go there today, like you said, you can sometimes see the second level of the insulae, the Roman apartment buildings, let's say. So it does give you that effect that also sometimes can happen in Pompeii. You really do feel that you are in an ancient city, and that you do need to do a lot of walking. But at the time, just like in the ancient city of Ephesus, which, one should, God, I would love to do a video there tomorrow, another time. It was.
Be with you.
Yes, God. Have you ever been to Ephesus before?
No, I have. I've been to Istanbul. I've never gotten. I've been to Istanbul twice. Never got to Ephesus.
It is because we don't have access to Iran, really, or Libya at the moment, but it has some of the most stunning ancient ruins. But that's for another day. So talking about Ostia, it was on the beach. It was on the sea. But because the river silted up, the land is no longer on the sea. It's not far away from it, but it's no longer on the sea. Now, I just want to do a little confession here, because we've had such a dandy time that, during this time period, with Dylan, we have been doing these TE destination videos for our YouTube channel. So everything's working. And so I'm very excited. We've done the Castelli Romani together,
right?
Which was a blast, going around on a pedal boat with a pink flamingo.
I love the flamingo. That was the best.
I do too. Oh, finally, someone got my little joke on it, where a gay old time was had by all. We were on a pink flamingo boating around on the island. Okay. Anyway, in the lake. But in fact, it was my neighbor from England who wrote that, Brendan, as a comment. But tomorrow, I'm very excited. Well, I'm excited to have this podcast. It's so great, to have a job where you can say, oh, wow, this is such an opportunity. I'm getting to chat with another one of the guides because I can learn about stuff. We are going to go and film. You've already filmed a bit with Dylan, but because we've got some better equipment to work with, we're refilming a lot of the scenes. And I don't know about you, but I have a blast because we see wonderful things like what we did when we were studying. And then we have wonderful lunches with wine. And
yes, we do.
We celebrate life, and we celebrate what we love, which is this history. And you really know Ostia. I can struggle through it, but I always feel like I want to learn more about it. So I am so looking forward to that.
I am too. It's going to be a fun day, and I think people be really, really surprised. Those who have never been, but have been to Italy and especially been to Rome, and they see how easy it is to get there and all the wonderful little treasures that it will really, really be exciting. So
Oh yeah,
something
and then
you need
there's
to
that little
watch.
like Renaissance medieval Borgo right next to it. That's
Uh,
where we're going to have lunch next to the
yes.
castle where Julius II was in. It's just so totally cool, I think. Um, and it's a lot of walking too when we get into Ostia
Mhm.
Antica. But okay, even before that, I'm going to be very adamant about something else that we're going to film, and it's great, which is what we do as well on the tour, because we take a train. You don't have to take a private car to get out
Yes.
there. We take public transport. At the Porta Ostiense in Rome itself, there is a little museum in there, and it has a model of Ostia Antica. So it's a great introduction for people
Yes.
to see that. So we go in and we see this lovely model, and then we go to the city. Did you know that once, many, many years ago, they were offering, and I did this, I got on a boat in the middle of Rome, I think right by Testaccio,
Hmm.
and took a boat ride down all the way to Ostia and then got off. And because the theater in Ostia Antica is in really good condition, they had performances on the ruin. So we sat
Hmm.
on the steps of where the audience was in the theater. So it's like we took this long boat ride down, about a 40-minute boat ride down the Tiber, as the ancients would have done, and got off
Ooh.
the boat into the river at night, and everything was lit up with torches. It was a lot of fun. I remember that.
I would absolutely love to do that. I've never done that, but I do have friends with kids who have taken they do a nature boat from around San Paulo, and they talk about the fauna and different things on the
Mm-hmm.
Tiber River, and then they leave people at the archaeological site, and it's supposed to be a lot of fun.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. So tell me, what would be your choice? Like, what do you really want to make sure that you get people to see when they go to Ostia?
I really try to make sure of all the categories of daily life
Mm-hmm.
that I get them to as many different categories because, as you know, the site is very, very large.
Mm-hmm.
And just like going to whether it's Pompeii or any other large archaeological site, you can't get to everything. So you always say, what is the best example? So,
Mm-hmm.
where we start is kind of nice because we have no choice. That is where the entrance is. But, you start through the necropolis and you get a sense, we always talk about, look, when we meet people, I always remind them, here's Porta San Paolo, there's that museum, in the
Mm-hmm.
wall, and this massive pyramid. And there are people that come to Rome and do not realize we have a 2,000-year-old pyramid. And I explain, remember,
Mm-hmm.
this is outside the wall because this is where the monuments were. Just like if you go to the Nomentana, just like if you go to Appian Way, monuments, catacombs, okay, the area of the dead outside the
Sure.
city. But even on a small scale, once you arrive at the archaeological site through the turnstile, we can kind of zigzag around
Mm.
where the different columbarium are. And this is important because when we're in Rome and you have that massive 100-foot tall pyramid, you're talking about the capital city of Rome. When we're talking about Ostia, remember that we're talking about a hustling, bustling seaport. So, yes, there's going to be magistrates and wealthy. And it's also, we talk how it changes over time, but this is working class. There are people who are working the docks, there are slaves, there are people coming in through the entire Roman Empire. I always say, imagine, and maybe it's just me being a New Yorker, but I say, imagine walking down a street, sometimes as a kid in New York City, and
Mm-hmm.
you hear, all these different languages in the same span of like 2-3 blocks. Well, it's similar in
Mm.
Ostia because of the people there. It was a cosmopolitan city, but it's fun. You could say, when we first arrive, I focus on these beautiful columbarium, the beautiful brickwork,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just showing people this is more how the middle class laid their dead. We don't, it's
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
big mausoleum.
Let's clarify, what are columbari for people, because they may not know exactly.
Sure. A columbarium, the columbari, these are, it's a large tomb that are here. They've got many that are even like family, private, that have many niches, that have these beautiful arches, okay? And they're about yay big. depending on the size, but they're designed for urns, okay?
Mm.
Because the Romans do both inhumation, cremation, but obviously for the lower classes, it's much more cost effective, and especially depending on the period. Once it becomes the rage, everything from the East or Egypt or whatever, there's people who want these mausoleums and these large
Mm.
structures. But we're going to have a whole lot of not burial with the body, okay, the inhumation, but cremation.
Sure.
And what is interesting in some of these areas of the columbarium, they even have centrally ustrinum, which is where the body was burnt. So you can
Mm.
take a look also at that. And you could see there's one in particular that is fun because there's a staircase going up. They don't have the second story, but it means that it was 2 stories. There is a niche where there would have been like lares or different gods, watching over the defunct, and you could just go, oh my gosh, okay. So imagine that you had columbarium that were public, you had columbarium that were, for an entire family, but there was also the area upstairs here in
Mm.
some of them in Ostia. So it's fascinating, but it gets that name from the dove, which is colomba. And it's funny, Rob, I was taking a walk in Garbatella at the park,
Mhm.
and I just passed by, and all of a sudden these birds were all flying, and it was just filled with doves.
Mm. Of
Beautiful, beautiful doves. But their nest is like that little shape. So the
course.
columbarium. So it's like that little shape, and you put in the urns, and they can be stacked all the way up.
I'm
The ones
always
in Rome were
fascinated by
enormous.
that stuff, like where nature is the inspiration for design, and you see things like
Absolutely.
that. That's really, really cool. Yes, of course, because the dead were buried outside, and then eventually you get to where the walls are. And I believe,
Exactly.
like, the first thing that you can see, and this is cool if it's open. I don't know if it's always open, but you can walk up to a second level and look into the baths and see all the beautiful mosaics of the
Yes,
floors of the
yes.
bath of Neptune, if I'm not mistaken.
The baths of Neptune. After you enter and you go through the big portico and you pass by one of my favorite bath complex, which was under restoration, the mosaics, the one for the carriages, the
Mm.
taxi drivers, right? And they have all the different names like Bashful and this one and that one and whatever. And yes, you go down that long road and
Mhm,
you can go up to the solarium, and there's a staircase going up
mhm,
in the baths of Neptune. And it's fantastic because you get this viewpoint and you just go, oh, wow, check it out. You look over the mosaics, you can
mhm,
see into the frigidarium, into the area where the exercise court was, where the little
mm,
areas, maybe you can imagine these rooms
mhm,
where maybe I'm getting massage or I'm buying a snack because we're going with friends.
mm,
But I do, that's a great place to bring people up, and you get that overall feeling looking over that massive bath complex.
mhm. Yes, definitely. And then from there, you get to the theater itself. And I
Yes.
also love, because it ties into, of course, with the Roman Forum. The Great Forum, which I would say in Rome was the first, therefore the greatest, was built up haphazardly. But then after a certain point, the Romans started to fit and follow a very specific requirement of how their cities were to be built. And you can truly see that with the Roman Forum in Ostia, because they have the central square, temples, right?
Right,
One
the
dedicated
open space,
to the open space.
Capitolium, you get sure.
That's
Area for well, what would be courthouses or possible courthouses, areas that would be for the Decurione, which is like their Senate. So we've got all this wonderful all around, but always that open space, that meeting space. But the
mhm,
Capitolium there is fantastic because of that. I love that huge staircase, which I wish we could
mm,
walk up. Years
never
ago you could, but not anymore. But it's a massive, beautiful, beautiful pedestal for that temple.
yeah, that is true, and I mean, of course, and it just seems, you get this understanding when you're able to see these grand staircases that they would lead up into the heavens, and that these temples were the homes of the gods. How it was a way for people to try to explain what nature was, right? To give attributes that are human to people, and inspire them, and put fear in their minds, I guess, from time to time. That these places of worship for the pagan gods, for the pagans who believed in these gods. So If I recall, other because I want to try to get, because of course we know with Ostia itself, it goes through different time periods and it goes through changes. But before we hit on that, let's talk about the other main things to see in Ostia of this as a
Sure.
general major port, because it's a major port and then it goes through some time changes, which
Right.
are very cool to talk about too. So we have also with the daily life, one could look into the bakeries, the forni, right? Where they make bread with the grain. So tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that, darling.
Yeah, because the importance of Ostia, really goes back to the grain being shipped in here. It was originally for the Roman army. If you think even during the Punic Wars, it was coming in and being
Mm-hmm.
then sent off to Spain. But taxation from so many places, from North Africa, from Egypt, from Sardinia, from Sicily. You imagine all the grains coming in. So this is a town about business. So when we bring you there, we really need to show you these are all the horea. What is a horea? These are massive warehouses.
Sure.
And when you go through, there is a massive horea that was even designed with big space down under the floor, creating kind of airflow so that there's air conditioning. And you just go, you have to understand how important it was to protect this grain like it was gold,
Mm.
because should something happen to the grain, Rome will starve. So you can even take people, remember, to the barracks of the Vigili. And that's another way. The Vigili, this goes back, if you think about the regions of Rome, it's Augustus who takes that arm of the military and says, okay, they're kind of like night police and the firemen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to happen in Ostia too, time of Claudius, and then it's going to be expanded in the time of Hadrian, because their job and where they were situated is fascinating. Nowadays, it's confusing. And I always remind people, do you see that long row of trees? Imagine right beyond it is the Tiber River.
Mm.
Problem is, because of silting, it's moved much further away. So I think that's the most confusing thing. Don't you think, Rob, when you bring people, you're like, this is a seaport and a fluvial port, and everyone is looking around going,
It's
where's the
landlocked.
sea?
Yeah.
Where's the river? You go, well, okay, I'll show you the river later when we go back towards the bathrooms, because you can see a piece of it,
Mm.
but there's a difference of like 3 kilometers. I said, but you have to realize they're putting this group of the Vigili, which their barracks are really, really wonderful. And in the
Mm.
back, there's also mosaics and different things. And these guys are basically up against the river, because you could see they're the night police. They're seeing who's coming in and out in the river, and their job is to make sure that there's no fires. Then we can take you down the street of the Molino and the street of the mills,
Mm.
because you've got Grand Horea, where they're protecting the grain, make sure the temperature is correct, excuse me. And, we've got all that volcanic stone on the bottom, things that are
Sure.
more fireproof. So we got the fire department, we've got the grain storage here. You imagine this people like ants moving in and storing
Mhm.
the grain. And then right across, they're grinding it up. There's and the thing that's so beautiful about some of those spaces
Mhm.
on that street of the mills, the modern name that we give these things in
Mhm.
archaeological sites, is that they've got the original, this beautiful stone, volcanic stone from Orvieto, and you've got the grist mills we've got with the holes, with the wood, and the donkey would be moving, or slaves. You've got the materials still there. They've got a lot
Mm.
of the materials, and you could see, imagine, here's where they're grinding, then they're taking
Mm.
the flour, then there's another room, and this is where the mixing is, and I'm back here is where the water, and
Mm.
then there's other zones where there's the actual ovens. So
Yeah.
you get to get this sense, okay, that we're bringing in goods, we're storing goods, we've
Mm.
got this. um, and then right behind it are some of the coolest apartment buildings, like the House of Diana, and the painted caseggiata, the painted tenement house, and you can go through the back courtyards. So you see everything's kind of right together. We're working here in the mills, we're working on the docks, we're working for the fire brigade, we're living in these tenement houses. Some of them are beautiful, lower levels. And then you go
Sure.
across the street, and there's a thermopolium, there's a shop where you can go and get food, which is, I think that's one of the little jewels of Ostia, because it is really lovely. You see where the room was where they worked, you see where the central room is, with the
Mhm.
two counters where you're coming up to the counter and you're ordering, I'll take, this and that, and the little ledges where they would have put the food and displayed. And then
Mm.
not only is there indoor seating,
Mm-hmm.
but outdoor
Outdoor
seating by the
seating.
fountain in the back. So it's just fantastic. Where do we eat? Where do we go? Stop for a glass of wine, But
Mm-hmm.
they've got even these wonderful places to stop and just get a little bit of refreshment, or as opposed to a full meal.
Mm.
And don't forget the bathrooms.
Of course, I
How
was
many
just
people
thinking about
come
that,
for
of
the
course, while you're
bathrooms?
talking. And that's we've got to make sure that Dylan films the toilets, the public toilets, where we
Have
go
to.
through, and yeah. Well, we don't have to go into, but it's so different from our concept of going to the toilets today.
Bring a good friend. Yeah.
I mean, let's just say, like, did they have? I think there was like a slave at the entrance of the toilet place, and he had sticks with sponges. I mean, because I think they were like, as the Italians say, usa getta, like use once and throw away. Because I can't imagine them being reused. Remember, in a time of no toilet paper.
How many sea sponges are we going through, Rob? You
Well,
could
the
safely
Romans were
get there.
excessive. Like,
They got the
oh god,
trough of the running water, rinse that baby off, pass it to the guy after you. Come
how
on.
gross. Oh my god. Okay. The Romans were very clean. It must have
The
had
emperor
water.
has his own sponge, Rob, every time. He gets a new
I would
one. I'm not
imagine that the
sure
emperor
everyone
would have
else.
their own sponge. Oh,
I would think
Jesus.
so.
Could you imagine, like, oh, I'm not okay. This is like you and I are going to be casual conversation. No, we're not going to go there. I just had a terrible mind. Like, this guy gives them an extra dirty sponge. Like, here you go. I'm done with it. And they're going to be like, oh God, okay, thanks,
Thank you. Thank you.
thanks. It's horrible. And then there's also the place where they were cleaning textiles, fabrics, clothes,
Yes.
right? Of course, with
Yes. The Pulonica.
urine, or as the British would say, urine. Oh my God.
Urine.
I know they say urine. Anyway, yes, there's all of that too. There's this lovely places. Now let's just go into a little bit about the progression. Now you can correct me, because if I recall that it became to a certain point that Ostia, because of the silting of the river, it was even problematic in the ancient world. And so we have the fourth emperor of Rome, right? So it's Augustus Tiberius, but Claudius tries to solve this problem because he builds another port a little bit further up the road, let's say a little further north of from where Ostia is. And so then we have a new city that came, and that Tiberius later on then improved on it, made it a much more functional port. But Claudius had built a kind of lighthouse. They apparently sank a barge and put an obelisk.
Yes.
Up, I mean, there's just wonderful stuff about that. And we have, because of Trajan's intervention on this, we have what we call the city of Portus. So we have Ostia, and then we have Portus. So tell us a little bit about Portus.
Okay, Ostia, as Rome reaches its height, this seaport was not able to maintain its function for, you have to think, this vast, unending desire for consumer goods, which is what we had in the city of Rome. Because, you just have to imagine the influx of things, that it's not just the food stuff, the marble, there's, I think about all of the things that we have, the columns of this, that, the obelisks, silks, the clothing, jewelry, but things are coming back. The trade is coming back from the east, it's coming back and forth. It isn't large enough. And, when you also think, which is why Ostia, which originally had a bit of a military take to it, it doesn't have a bay. There's no real natural protective bay for ships. So it has that. It's up against the sea, plus it's the river. You had to switch the boats. You had to, offload materials, smaller boats to get them in. They needed to find a solution. So they created this new port of Claudius. It's only a few kilometers north. And what he did was put in these giant two pincers, but they discovered very, very quickly. And as a matter of fact, it's before the thing was even inaugurated, a storm wiped it out with about the destruction, they say, about 200 ships. Nowadays, some people say that it was probably a tsunami, which is quite possible. Now, wipes it out. So obviously, it's not really doing its function, but it's just helping. As it gets transformed by the time of Trajan. And that's when we get this fantastic man-made lake with a canal from the area of the pincers so they could come in, they go in this shape. They basically can offload depending on what your material is. Portus starts to grow up. And it eventually, because they can put in another man-made canal to the Tiber River that was much straighter. Because if you look at a map even today and you see where Ostia is, and you see this this bend and this twist,
Yep.
it was difficult to maneuver. And like you said, the problem always existed with silting. It just became easier and made more sense to start using Portus more, and eventually the port that was designed just to help Ostia out really becomes the focal port of Rome. And that's going to change completely the dynamics of the city of Ostia. Not necessarily for the bad in the beginning, because if you think about it, in the height of Ostia, first of all, the tradition and history for the ancient Romans going back how many generations, right? How important that is. So would you rather live in a new city? Would you rather live in the historically important Ostia, where you have multiple bath complexes, fantastic bath complexes? You've got private, semi-private. There's certain apartment complexes that closed in the space between them, and there's like semi-private for the buildings. You've got the theater. You've got a business center, the only one that's been discovered in the Roman Empire. We got to take some great shots out there. Piazzale della Cooperazione. You got it all. So even as people are going to start to do more business in Portus, you do get magistrates that prefer now to have their seaside house, where we've got, the baths and the theater and and all the amenities. So Ostia just kind of changes. Imagine that the people who are going to start to flock there are going to be the dock workers. Some of the old apartment buildings are going to be transformed into houses for the wealthy, and we're going to see a lot of changes through the structures. So Ostia starts more military, then it moves and it's all mercantile, and then it kind of changes again, and it has another existence, and that's like its final heyday is really as this important seaside town.
Gosh.
And that's before the fall.
Well, it's so funny when you think about it in like kind of modern context, especially the way you beautifully described it. It makes me think of like Charleston in the United States. It becomes a huge vacation spot for the wealthy, and a huge sense of history even for the Romans. And that's really interesting because, when we're having the houses and it becomes this kind of vacation area is in the 300s or the late 200s, early 300s is when that's going on. And there's a thing that I have a whole podcast I've recorded over a year ago, but we will put it up eventually with Caterina. We talked about the beautiful opus sectile marbles that were found in Ostia. So these magnificent inlay marble images, walls, like a whole room that was found. It was still there, and they have it removed, and it's in the Medieval Museum of Rome only because they had the space for it in Eur. And I think it closed. I don't think, did you ever get to see it? Because I did. It was amazing.
Yes, I have. I've seen it multiple times, but that museum has been closed for quite a long time, and I don't know if it's reopened. The last time, because I don't live far from Eur in Garbatella, and I have to go and check, because it really is. In my presentation, I have some nice photography of it, and you can get a sense of it. And you know what? That just validates exactly the point of the transformation of the city, because when do you see this important house where the walls are literally covered in inlay marble? And just so people understand, it's not just a pattern. There's this like lion biting an animal, and there's figures, and there's a room that's supposed to look almost like you're outside to the garden with lattice and things and wood, and it's all using this cut marble. But if you look at the date to that, it's much later. It's after the business has left. This is like around 4th century. So you say, okay, so they're building quite beautiful things. at this period. It's they're not going to build any more tenement houses. We have no need for temporary housing because there's such a flood of people as the
Sure.
seasons are correct and the boats are coming in and there's people waiting for the sea to change or whatever. That's not what the city is about. And that's when you can see some other really, really beautiful villas that
Mhm.
start coming into play, like Cupid and Psyche, which is one of my favorites,
Yeah.
with that beautiful statue.
Mm.
So,
Wow, that's so much that we're going to have to cover. And then what we're going to try to do, hopefully, is if it's open, because the site isn't, like I was trying to look on it today on the internet, is to go to Portus. Because Portus, of course, it looks so cool with what you were saying about the Isla Sacra that I completely forgot out of my mind, but it looks really, really interesting. It belongs, of course, to the Torlonia family. Remember, guys, that if you've listened to some of our other podcasts, specifically the one with Guya or our YouTube video, we talk about the
right.
Torlonia family and their wealth. So this property belongs to the Torlonia family. In fact, in their exhibit, they have this beautiful relief of the Torlonia exhibit. I think you know what I'm talking about, where they show the port of Ostia and they show all these gods being depicted, like the god Bacchus. And oh
Right.
gosh, who is the other god?
This is the one that has the god Helios and the rays of light.
Helios. Yeah,
right?
it's amazing.
And
It's like one of the
it's
best examples of ever something like this, and it was found at Portus, and it belonged to the Torlonia family. But it's one of the most prized pieces in that collection. And remember, guys, that we're going to be eventually putting this up on YouTube with the images that we are talking about, so that you guys can have a visual and come and look at this later on. But yeah, no, I really hope that we can sneak that in tomorrow and check
that
it
would be
out.
fantastic. And Rob, you could sneak into, there's a sarcophagus in the Vatican that shows Portus.
Oh, really?
And that one's, and that's a really beautiful one because it shows the river and all this activity in this sarcophagus.
Mm.
So that's another good one. You go, but it just, what, if we have these bas reliefs, we have these images, it just shows how important these pieces were, or these cities were.
Yeah, and it's so great because it is so close to Rome, and it's just like a 35-40 minute train ride to get to Ostia, with a lot of other history involved in it. So, Gracelyn, just to finish up our little chat about Ostia and getting me more excited every moment to go and do the video with you, is there anything else you'd like to add to talk about Ostia, Antica?
About Ostia Antica? No, one of I think one of the saddest things is that we don't really have not that much in terms of the Middle Ages, but it is enjoyable to see what is there and why. By the way, it's the discovery of Ostia, which is interesting too. Ostia was never, like I said before, it's not like Pompeii or Colonium. It's not covered. It's not gone. It's not forgotten. It was very much there, which means pieces of Ostia went everywhere. And these are even throughout other parts of Europe as it slowly becomes abandoned. And at the same time, the silt is moving in and just covering things, over. So there's pieces of it that are sticking up. And eventually in the time of the popes, they're going to start to uncover that, which is why it's so cool to go to the Capitolium, that important temple, Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, and Juno Minerva, Jupiter. And it's important to go see that. But you have to imagine that's always sticking up. In the time of the popes, this is the time of archaeology. This is when it begins to in the Roman Forum and how they dig this out, how they get to different levels. But then we get to the time of Mussolini and they start to move quicker and quicker. Not a whole lot of certain stratospheres in the time of Mussolini, whether it's in the city of Rome or Ostia, were saved. They get rid of Rome's weak period, which was the Middle Ages, in the eyes of that time period. Let's just go all the way down to the most important stuff. So that we lose a little bit of, but I think the beauty is seeing what is a cosmopolitan city like 2,000 years ago. And I always get this impression, Rob, that it's tolerant,
Mm.
You can see Mithraeums. You can see where there are multiple temples, temple to the ancient Roman gods, temples to Eastern cults, apartment complexes with gods from Egypt, like the apartment of Serapis. And then you go all the way out and see where the synagogue is. And you
That's
just
right.
say, like I mentioned, it's cosmopolitan. It had to have been tolerant in a sense because of the amount of people there.
Mm.
But then you also see a little bit of what happens as Christianity comes into persecution. We get rid
Mm.
of that, it's accepted, and
Mm.
now it's the official religion. And that's when there are traces showing how the tables turned,
Sure.
and traces like sculpture of Mithras that
Yeah.
was broken into pieces, and the archaeologists found it in a sewer.
Mm.
And then the Christians, right above where that sacred space was for Mithras, that's where there's going to be an oratorio. So it kind of tells you about human nature walking through the site, from times of tolerance, times of less tolerance. Nothing changes. Even
Absolutely.
today, we got the same thing going on. So,
It's so
but it's
funny because, like,
fascinating.
you see these things 2,000 years ago, and then there are so many things that can relate to today. Well,
Yes.
it's definitely so much to go see. It's very exciting. And of course, going to see a place like this, all the difference in the world, unless you do a lot of studying up on your own, is to have someone like you take people around. Now, based on your experience, since we started doing these podcasts, I don't think I had the opportunity to ask you yet. I always like to ask guides, because of your experience of traveling and experience dealing with different clients, TE travel tips. If you could recommend something to clients, what would it be in their preparation for coming to Italy?
Oh well. If I could, if I could recommend something, I would say to maybe know your audience.
Mm.
What do I mean by that is, if you have a family with young kids and you have a family of a certain size, there are many different types of tours that might
Mm.
be good for you. Maybe a tour that's shorter, maybe a tour that's private, that's just focusing on you. I think it's really good to get a sense of, people in the group, and not just attention spans, because I have to say, I love doing tours with kids, that,
Mhm.
over
Yeah.
all these years. And I think sometimes people underestimate their children, but they're the ones who can
Mhm.
go for a pretty long
Sure.
time. But I would say, kind of, think about, think very carefully when you're doing a tour. What would you rather do? Is just wandering around and getting a feel for the city more important, so that you do like roam in a day,
Mhm.
or is it, I like to have baby bites and then time on my own, and maybe do 3 hours a day, that you get to like a little bit of art here, a little bit of archaeology here, run out to Ostia
Absolutely.
here, go over to the Vatican here. So I would say, kind of, think about what your personality, your partner's personality, or, your family or needs of your friends are,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of different ways that I think we accommodate. And also, don't be shy, right to the office if you don't know, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you just don't know. If you've never been to a country before, and say, what is best? I have grandma, I have, my 5-year-old son. Sometimes you need a little bit of help. So
Absolutely.
there's lots of plans you can use. Ask us. That's what I would say.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in fact, that's kind of what we do, is like we provide lots of information for people for doing stuff like that. But it's also good for them to know what they want, who they have with them,
Hmm.
what everyone's looking for, especially if you have a different size group, a large family, a small family, etc. Well, thank you very much, Gracelyn. It was a great, as always, to talk with you. I just wanted to say, before we close up, to everybody listening, if you have any questions about the podcast or anything that we can help out with, please feel free to write to us at office@througheternity.com, ThroughEternity phew.com. And we'd love to get your emails, and we'd love to read them out loud to people on our podcast, if it's about the podcast, of course, itself. Anyway, so thank you again. And I'm so excited. We're going to be filming soon, and people will be able to see that TE destinations, Ostia, Antica, by the time they're going to be listening to this, or at least in a couple of days after they start listening to this. So it's a great taste, a preview of what we're going to be doing.
Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity. It is always fun, my friend. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Ciao, darling. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for listening to our TE Talks with Guides. We have a new episode every Wednesday. Please subscribe to get an alert when each podcast comes out. Rate us and tell people how you enjoyed it, and share it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Most importantly, if you enjoyed it, send us a feedback about the show. Also, if you are curious about what some of these people and places we talked about look like, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the video on this podcast, where we have inserted special images for you to further enjoy the story.